there's a lot of stuff going on now. But a smaller intimate gathering.
Yes.
Yeah. At least there's not more of us here than in the audience.
That would be really
like the baseline.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you for braving the rain and coming over to our panel. Maybe, I don't know if people want to move up, we're in the back. But we are proud to present a panel today looking at trust in the media in Central and Eastern Europe. There's been a lot related to this topic so far during the conference, but we really wanted to present a very Central European angle to the topic. I should mention just at the outset that Tomáš Bela, who was supposed to be here from Deník N, is sick, so he was not able to come to the festival at all, but we're very happy to have Silvie Lauder to my right, who is an excellent reporter for the Czech weekly called Respekt, and I know trust is a very important topic to her, and she will be filling in for Tomáš today. Let me also say at the outset, we're very thankful to the organizers that they are including a panel related to Central Europe. I've been at this event for the last couple of years, and it's always been a pity to me that we didn't have more people from Central Europe because there's so much valuable networking that goes on at this event, and you learn so much through different inspiring examples. And until this year, I think there have really not been as many people from that region that are here this time. Beyond the people that are with me, I've seen at least a large contingent from Poland, people from Romania, people from Serbia, Bosnia, so it's really great that this conference is spreading out and including more and more people from the region. In my experience, having worked in Central and Eastern Europe for about 20 years, it's really been only a handful of people that are networked at events like this. So just again, thanks to the organizers for including this panel. I should start off also by saying my name is Jeremy Druker. I'll be moderating today. I run a publishing and training organization based in Prague, which is called Transitions. Trust is also a very important element to us and a lot of the work we do. I won't be going into detail, but rather letting my colleagues speak about that. I think maybe we can start with Anita, who is here from Atlatszo in Hungary, which I learned recently means transparency, right? Or transparent?
Transparent.
Transparent, and is one of the leading investigative journalism organizations in the region, beyond just Hungary, and does a lot of things to engage its readers. So please, could you just begin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the interest. And so first of all, I think, I don't think we really needed to think about trust before so much as now, because it was just obvious that if we do our work or job right, audiences would trust us, because we wouldn't publish anything that's false. But these days there are more and more attacks at us, and I think it's also true for the entire region. So the Hungarian government and lots of governments around the world, including the US president, as we know, are trying to undermine the credibility of independent media, and that's happening to us too. Atlatszo itself was under very heavy attack from the propaganda media trying to undermine us and our credibility in the fall, when we had a big story about the use of luxury yachts and planes of the government. And we became targets of attacks, trying to claim that we were held by the CIA or Mossad or whatever, that we are just agents of foreign powers, that we are lying. So gaining the trust of the audiences is becoming a bigger and bigger issue because it's being undermined. And there are quite a few ways that we try to do this. And one of those is being very transparent about how we work. It's funny how our name does mean transparent. So we always publish and are completely transparent about how we did our work. So when we published this big investigation about the luxury vehicles, we included every single online open source tool that we used. We used many flight and maritime tracking websites, investigative sites, company records internationally, and both inside Hungary. Also, whenever we work with data, we do a lot of data stories. We publish the entire data set as it is explained by the open data movement, but in Hungary that's actually a pretty new and unusual thing. Most media outlets just like publish a story based on data sets, and then they don't even show you how they got that data, and it's completely opaque. We publish everything in a machine-readable format. And also, we depend mostly on donations from our readers, so trust is even more important because an average of 60 or 70% of our income comes from readers, micro-donations, or their income tax 1% in Hungary. So we need to build a very close relationship with our readers. And one way of that is having meetings, concerts, or just evenings when they can ask us. And actually we are in the middle of producing new videos where we are asking them for donations so they can see our face. They know who we are, we directly address them and talk to them. And we are just completely open about who we are and how we operate. And another unique thing we do is that we put an entire annual report and finances on the website every year, so anyone can see what we are up to. And this actually leads to a few very absurd and ironic events when government propaganda outlets pretend that they investigated us and uncovered how we are financed, when all they have to do is look at our website, and that is actually what they do. But they write stories about how they investigated the financing of Atlatszo. So yes, our main tool to build trust is transparency, I think.
Okay, thank you for getting us started. Now I'll turn it over to you, Silvia. Maybe you could talk about Respekt and how you've done it. We often joke, actually, that Respekt in the Czech Republic is almost like a cult. Maybe that's too strong a word, but it has managed over the last how many years? How many years?
30 years.
30 years. It's okay. Thank you. Over the last 30 years now, there's a very, very devoted audience to Respekt. And I think those are people, as you said before, that you feel very responsible about, that they believe so strongly in you and your publication.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. As you said, as Jeremy said, I'm filling in for Tomáš Bela. But I'm not going to talk about Slovakia. Unfortunately, I'm going to talk about the Czech reality, even though there are some similarities between the countries because they were once one country. But before I go to specifically my magazine, I would like to talk about some specific things about the region that are different from other regions in the world. And I was inspired by what I just heard a few hours ago, the words by Alan Rusbridger, the former editor-in-chief of The Guardian. And he said, the debate was about how the world today is different for the journalists and how journalists are perceived from the world, let's say in the 70s and the 80s, even the 90s. And he said something very interesting. He said, well, I remember the world where journalists were trusted, really liked people, that other people, the audience really liked and trusted and have them as a source of information for them. And that immediately got me thinking about today's debate that in the Eastern Bloc, so to speak, or the Central Europe, this was not the case in the 70s and the 80s. The journalists were not definitely trusted and well-liked people. They were seen, of course, not by everyone in the society, but the large part of the society as someone who's collaborating with the regime and basically lying to them about the reality of the country. So that's one difference. And also, if you look at the timeline, when the change came, roughly 30 years ago, we only had, I mean, I said we, I didn't do it because I was in the like elementary school, but the new generation of journalists, so to speak, only had about 10 years to regain the confidence in the traditional media before the internet came. And I'm saying this because I feel like this is quite important moment, because as you were just a few years in of building serious quality media, you were hit by a wave that we saw what this wave did to the New York Times or The Guardian or really trusted media. So you can imagine what this wave and what this new situation did to newly established, quite young Czech media or generally media in the region. And also one of the things I think which are quite important, specifically in the Czech Republic, is there are other influences, other things that are undermining the trust towards the journalists. And specifically, I would mention the Russian influence. Of course, Russia is operating everywhere, but not everywhere is similarly successful as it is in the Czech Republic. And I just give you very little, like a detail to imagine the scale of the problem. There is roughly or just around 3 times or even 4 times, I would say, I think the number is around 3 times as much people working at the Russian embassy in Prague than there is in London. And you can compare the size of the country. So in a sense, and then there are various reasons for this, but in a sense it's like a center of Prague or Czech Republic, again, for various reasons, mainly a very strong support from prominent politicians and so on, but is like a center of the Russian sort of, so to speak, hybrid war operations or fake news operations in the Czech Republic. So all that in one package, I would say, is influencing how people view journalists, and also the traditional techniques, which also Anita mentioned, and it's similar in every country, I would say, but it's very much present also in the Czech Republic. The negative relationship that prominent politicians have towards the media, but in the Czech Republic it's demonstrated in quite extreme way, but maybe again similar to Hungary. But I give you, and then now I'm jumping to the concrete story of my magazine. Is the current president of the Czech Republic, used to be a prime minister in the late 90s and early noughties, and he, after one comment my magazine published, he actually announced publicly that his main goal one of the main goals of his political career was to literally destroy the magazine, not just to make us apologize for the comment or just, do whatever, just destroy that. He wanted us to stop existing. He didn't succeed, so that's fun. But since then, he is attacking us constantly, and of course, it has a sort of a bittersweet consequence to it, because every time in the very, very strongly polarized society, again, like so many countries are, but Czech Republic also is extremely polarized society. Every time Mr. President mentions my magazine in a negative way, we have a sort of a spike in a number of subscriptions and people supporting us. I say it's a bittersweet because, of course, we are glad people want to support us and they want to read us, but I always say I would rather see a different motivation in the readers to supporting us, not just not the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of logic. Just because you're a good magazine, I want to support you, not to, I'm angry at the president and I'm going to do something that will anger him even more. I don't want to be too long, so I will head to the end. I agree very much with what Anita said. We were regarding how you support the trust of the readers and how you maybe gain it more. We very much believe in transparency and in introducing people to our work process and our ethics and who we are. So it's not only that we do a lot of debates with the magazine, but also we travel a lot around the country, visiting schools, visiting various libraries and so on, and introducing our work and saying, and I think that's one of the main I usually say that's one of the main difference between serious journalists and the people who produce fake news. The fake news people will never, I always say to the audience, the fake news people will never go to you and sit in front of you and answer your questions and debate whatever it's on your mind. So that's one of the reasons. But also one of the things we're very, and it's also quite painful, but it's important is, again, I was reminded by Alan Rusbridger this just a few hours ago. He talked about the fact how important it is for journalists to admit mistakes. And all journalists here know what I mean when I say it's painful. And they also discussed it in the panel, and the moderator asked Alan Rosbridge, why is it so difficult for journalists to admit they made a mistake? And they just discussed it, and I just felt the urge to like raise my hand and say, because your whole point of your job is to be right, to correctly report about something. And when you make a mistake, at least that's how I feel, when you make a mistake, it's like you're failing in your basic, most important role. So that's why it's so painful to admit that you made a mistake. But that's what we do. It's one of our we put a lot of emphasis on that. And we have a section which is quite on the beginning of the magazine, where we don't even, we go further than just to say we report really mistakes. We also say that we weren't precise, for instance. You know, we just go maybe one step further, say such and such sentence wasn't really precise. What we meant was this, or it's maybe more, it should have been written in such and such way. So, and we apologize regularly. And I see that people appreciate it quite a lot, and they say, well, now I feel that if I read it and you do make a mistake, I know maybe in next issue or 2 issues after that, you will actually let me know that you made a mistake. So I think that's also quite important. Yeah, and again, one of the cliché is every time somebody says it and people laugh, and I laugh sometimes too, and it sounds like something from like an American TV show, sorry Jeremy, it's like this American TV show where the cops always say, well, we were just doing our job. I think this is, you know, as cliched as it sounds, I think one of the most important things to gain the trust and maintain it is just to do our job properly, as it's supposed to be done, and that's what we're trying to do in Respekt.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Jaroslav Valuch, who is going to talk about a project specifically reaching out to some of the people who have very low levels of trust in the media, and that's seniors. So Jaro, if you could please.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. So I will share just a few thoughts and lessons that we learned over the past year or 2 years, really meeting with the elderly part of our population and the senior citizens and talking about the media, bringing journalists and journalism students to talk about the media. But for the start, I will just follow up on what Silvia was mentioning about the specificity of the region and of the maybe older generations in Czech Republic, but not just in the Czech Republic. In a way, they are currently in a better position than their kind of peers in the Western democratic countries, because during those communist times when the media were state-controlled, they did develop naturally kind of media literacy skills, right? Like how to read between the lines, like not trusting everything that is printed, not trusting everything that is on television. So it was kind of like this natural critical thinking skills that we today kind of discuss a lot in terms of media literacy. The problem today is that they actually feel, again, that we are in the similar situation, right? That the mainstream media, the professional media are in the hands of oligarchs. They are controlled by some powerful forces behind, by Brussels, by Soros, whatever conspiracy theory you can come up with. So again, they are actually using what they learned, the skills and abilities that they learned during the communist regime times. They are just overly critical about any official source of information, and the strategy they use is they are turning to the sources they know, their friends, their family members, their co-workers, and they use emails and mostly emails as this kind of closed channel of information. So they apply the trust to the sources they trust the most, is the people who are close to them, but they just don't assess the quality of the very original sources of the information. And obviously, being older generation that is not, that has hardships adapting to the constant development of technology and communication ecosystem, I mean, they are easy target, and they're actually the most vulnerable group within the society, and they are the target group #1 of all those disinformation sources and campaigns, particularly through emails during the elections. So So yeah, that's just to explain a little bit the context of the Czech Republic and the older generations. And many research, not just in the Czech Republic, just confirm that it's actually the 55 plus part of population that is most susceptible, but also most active sharing, part of population sharing of fake news and disinformation, right? So it's not the young people necessarily, it's the older generation. So this is the current status, and it was actually the journalism students that we work with over the past 2 years, you know, training them how to do fact-checking, verification and stuff. And some of them said like, yeah, I mean, we don't want to do the fact-checking, but we would like to do, we would like to teach some of the vulnerable groups on how to understand media. And it was actually the students that came up with the idea, like, let's try to focus on the vulnerable groups of seniors. Because all these disinformation campaigns and chain emails campaigns, they are really tearing families apart, I think. I mean, Silvia was writing about it, right? Like, it's really, really breaking the relationships within families. It's really ugly and unfair as well. So these are the origins why we've decided, like, okay, so let's see if we can adopt some of the media literacy kind of education concepts, but not towards kids and students. There are so many great projects already going on in terms of media literacy for students and schools, but almost none of them targeting actually the older populations. And so over the past year, we've organized dozens and dozens of events in small towns and cities all around the Czech Republic, collecting many experiences and lessons learned. But the one point I want to highlight is that many of the conversations about the trust that I was visiting today are about like building trust with your readers as a medium, or building trust with your audience. But actually transitions we don't publish for Czech-speaking audiences. The program we do is actually targeting also those who kind of gave up on news, right? Like who kind of gave up on searching for good quality information. They just resigned. Their, you know, it's a feeling of apathy, confusion that, you know, today there's no way how to find what to trust and what not. So this is the approach we take. We are not building better relationship with our audiences or readers. We are trying to kind of help the general older populations to really regain trust in good quality journalism and responsible information processing, not necessarily kind of picking up certain media outlets, but really talking about the media, about the quality journalism. And we've engaged so many journalists in those events, and what we've seen now, there's so many stereotypes the people have about journalists, which is not surprising, but also there are so many stereotypes the journalists have about the general population or the older people. And many of them are actually scared of them, right? And particularly, you know, if you have the relationship only through Facebook, well, there's no wonder, but like really, one of the most important learnings that I have is like that really on the personal level, interpersonal connection, talking to people, it really is not that scary. It's not that scary as it seems. And I think many of the journalists who actually participated can say that, like, yeah, well, maybe it was unnecessarily stereotyping of the older citizens. Not all of them hate us, actually. And ending on the topic of trust, it's just, I mean, trust is the key word. That's where we ended up as well. We started like fighting disinformation, but in the end we're not doing that. We're basically, again, trying to build trust in good quality journalism and responsible information processing. But what trust means, right? Like, let's try to break it down. And it's important to see at least two main elements of trust. One part of it is the trust in the sources. But the second, very important, is the trust in own capacity or own ability to navigate through the complicated information ecosystem. And we really need to focus on both of these components, right? Like helping people to trust or to build trust in the good quality sources, but also to equip them with skills so that their own trust in their own capacity is increased. if we just keep, telling them like, oh, this is fake news, don't follow this source, well, this is not really working. You really need to find ways how to help them to be less confused and less apathetic about the sources of information.
Okay, thank you. Be curious how either of you would, or both of you would respond to that assessment. Do you feel like your audiences really know what you're doing? You probably do, I guess, the core audiences, not even the core audiences.
I mean, if I may very briefly, we made a little video a few years ago, 2 years ago, about how the magazine is done. We just basically, it was just a bunch of friends of the team. They took a camera and they just documented 1 week in the life of the magazine, starting on Monday morning with all the meetings and planning, and then they followed few reporters around, and then they stayed, obviously, we have a deadline on Friday night, and they showed the, the whole day, the 15 hours day, when we're there until the night and so on. And we published it, of course, on the social media and elsewhere. And the overwhelming response from even our readers who actually hold the magazine every week in their hands was, I had no idea it's so much work. I had no idea all this you have to do. And you can imagine all the journalists here that it was just like a 3-minute video. It didn't cover everything which is in the job, and very often, and this is the same for the elder generation, but also for the students, but even for the general public, people just don't know what means. I give you just like a simple example, I don't know, one quote for a politician. What does it require to get this one quote? How many phone calls with the spokesperson? How many phone calls or messages with the actual politician? How many back and forth? The quote could be a result of a 20-minute conversation because he's elusive or she, and he doesn't want to really answer that, and you go on and on and on. So it's just that many people don't know how much work gets into one newspaper article, and I would say once they realize how much work you do in order to bring them the proper article and the proper stuff, you feel, I'm not saying this is universal and it doesn't work for everyone, but I could feel in the reactions to the video that they respected us more, I felt, because they saw how much passion and dedication and, skipping your personal life and all that goes into the process, actually. So.
I would like to pick up on the idea of people who have given up completely. I think that's one of the biggest problems in Hungary right now, because we have our core audience who I guess trust us, but obviously we would like to reach a much wider audience. That's why we encourage all other media outlets to pick up our stories and spread them. But I think the biggest problem in Hungary is that many people just don't trust anybody anymore, because they say everybody is lying, everybody has an agenda, you are just the same as the other guys. And media literacy is in some areas so low that people just have given up trusting themselves even to differentiate falsehoods from truth. And I think that's something that is really lacking in the entire region, proper media literacy education that would help kids growing up to evaluate what they are learning. And I think this needs to be just like very little things. I remember I had one teacher who just out of fun had one 45-minute media literacy class for us when I was in high school. And that just made a huge difference, because he just showed us how if a woman is talking about sexual assault, if you just show the face, how much difference it makes than if you just show the entire body, that it's just like you read it in a different way. So it's like very little things could help a lot and help people trust media more, because it's very hard to get our stories out. And you write a story because you want to make a difference. You want people to react to it. You want change to be, you want to see change, because that's why you are doing your job. You want less corruption, less fraud, you want less environmental destruction, but if people don't trust you, that will just never happen.
And as you said, you're in a particularly difficult position also because the government is really trying to portray you as much as possible as activists, right? That you're not true journalists, you're actually activists.
And not only the government, actually, sometimes our fellow competitors try to portray us as activists. And, but you know, I think that's not always a bad label, because they portray us as activists, for example, because we have a fake news hunter game for high school students, and we go to high schools and teach them about fake news. And if that labels us as activists, then so be it. We are happy to be so. And also we have a Freedom of Information request generator platform, which is actually just a simple tool that allows any citizen to file a Freedom of Information request with any government or municipal department. I heard somebody say that Atlatszo single-handedly taught Hungary what freedom of information was with that tool. So if that is activism, yes, we are activists and we are happy about that.
Okay, thank you. Jaro, maybe I'll ask you, I know you've talked a lot, or thought a lot about how to build upon this project and work to open up the media and try to come up with some steps for publications that maybe aren't quite as open as Silvia's, but others to really try to connect more with their audience. So what are some ideas that you're thinking of in that area?
Yeah, well, so it again goes back to the question of trust and building the trust, and about being open about the work that the journalists are doing. What we've learned is really like we need to go offline now. I mean, we cannot solve the problem through social media that are actually one of the causes of the problem by just running campaigns on social media. So we really need to start building offline social networks of trust when actually the journalists are going to the field, talking to people. Because very often when we visited some of the remote places and towns and villages, people said like, yeah, well, it was only the president or the prime minister who visited the neighboring village during their campaign. So we felt like that they care about us. And once you bring someone else, once you bring a journalist, I mean, people really do appreciate it, that somebody is actually interested in their lives and is going to talk to them. And I've never seen any like attacks or hate speech that otherwise would be on social media. And the important part of, again, I'm just trying to grasp what the trust is. And I mean, some researchers at Masaryk University in Brno in the Czech Republic are now suggesting and researching actually two important components of what constitutes trust in journalists and media. One component is reflexive trust, and the second is affective trust. The reflexive trust means that people do understand and expect from journalists and media to follow certain standards and principles, right? Like ethical standards, distinguishing the news from commentary, all these basic things. People intuitively know about that. They expect the journalists to be balanced, to be objective, to cover all sides, to all these traditional things. So that's the reflexive component. But then there is the affective component, which means that people also want to kind of feel that the journalists are on their side, or that the journalists or the media are one of them. And very often these two components are in conflict, because many people expect the media and journalists to do the reflexive part, right? Like to be really impartial, unbiased, like really following all the ethical standards, but at the same time they expect them to be like one of them and to respect their own values, right? So these parts are in conflict. And if we are talking about like building or rebuilding trust, we always need to keep in mind at least these two components. And these are the researchers, but me as a practitioner, after spending this year really a lot of time in different parts, tiny cities in the Czech Republic, it actually seems like that, yes, it's working, because if you bring people do appreciate when you talk about like how the news are done or how the reports are done. As Silvia mentioned, for example, you show it in the video. So this is the component of this reflexive trust, but it only works if there is a journalist explaining it, right? So that the people can actually feel like that the journalist is a real human. It's not a puppet in the hands of oligarchs, the businessmen, the politicians, right? And even though they disagree with their political opinion, and we had one event also with Silvia when it became a little bit heated, but in the end, the participants all highly, highly appreciated the fact that the journalist was there, was open about opinions, and was able to fight for those opinions, right? So they saw the journalists are not just the puppets. So again, this is like those two components. And on the other hand, if you just bring the journalist and the journalist starts talking about like, oh, there are disinformation, don't trust disinformation, don't trust the fake news, and if the journalist doesn't speak about like how good journalism should look like, it's not gonna work either. So yeah, it's really about like mixing these approaches so that people feel like they have better understanding of how information should be processed, but also they feel that the journalists are actually on their side. You know, they're protecting their interests from the powerful. If the journalists and the media manage to do this, I think like it's the most effective way how to build the trust.
Okay, thank you. Dad, if you want to comment on that? Yeah.
No, it sounds very interesting, but also it's a challenge because people's interests are different, they varies. Because, you know, as you were saying that, I just remember how contradicting reactions we sometimes get, like you cover too much of that and not enough of that, and too much of A and not enough of B. And then 2 minutes later someone comes in and say you cover too much of B and not enough of A. And it goes, there's so many topics and you just have to, but I'm probably not saying anything clever at the moment. It's just a constant balancing process of covering all the important areas, but at the same time not depressing your readers so much with like a serious topic. You put some lighter stuff in, and at the same time cover important issues, but at the same time mix in like a real life, something that people actually live, and it's not only an important topic. So I think it's like an ongoing balancing act and process of thinking about your audience and what do they actually need and want from you.
Okay.
Sorry for such an obvious, I'm being Captain Obvious here probably, yeah.
Did you want to
yeah, just one sentence that this job is made much harder by the political climate that's very, very polarized. So our main profile is fighting corruption. And obviously it's easier for a government to steal than for the opposition. So many of our stories about the government. So we are kind of categorized like this anti-government outlet, which we are not. We are anti-corruption. So a few months ago, or maybe last year, we, for example, had a story about a corruption case involving one of the opposition parties who are in power in one of the Budapest municipalities. And we got all these attacks, like, how dare you attack your own side? And like, we don't have a side. And, you know, it's covering both sides, and corruption, wherever it pops up, is one way to gain trust. But the whole polarized climate makes it very hard because you get attacked. But it's a cliche to say, but that says that we are doing our job right.
Well, if that's what they say, if everyone hates you similarly, you're probably doing your job right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we'll turn it over. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes to the audience. If there are comments or questions, yes, please.
Hi, I'm Samantha McCann with the Solutions Journalism Network. I'm wondering how you are measuring success with all these different initiatives. You know, you're out there trying to build trust, but what are you aiming for, and how are you capturing that? How are you measuring that?
Yeah, for us, I mean, most of the stuff that I was talking about, like mostly anecdotes from the year kind of field experience. We do have now evaluators looking into it. At the same time, I mean, we're collecting the feedback also after the events, and it's just usually unanimously positive, simply appreciating the fact that the journalists, made the effort and traveled to that place and talked to people, and they had the opportunity, particularly speaking about the older generations, right, when they very often don't have any other kind of type of social events opportunities. So the feedback and the responses so far, like, really overwhelmingly positive, but we need obviously more outside evaluation perspective on that. In terms of like what we are trying to achieve is like really, we started as fighting disinformation, then we relabeled it as media education of senior citizens, and now I would rather label it as understanding the world of media and communication together with senior citizens, right? Like really acknowledging their life experiences. So in terms of like objectives, it's not necessarily to make them more secure or more effective in fact-checking. It's rather helping them to get more self-confidence in being able to distinguish what sources and what information they can trust or not. So those are some of the benchmarks that we're trying to focus on. And another very important element is the intergenerational aspect. The idea started from journalism students, and they're still involved. And this is like 100% always positively evaluated, that actually the students are part of these events. And they, for the seniors, they have many stereotypes about younger generations, like traditionally, right? And now when they see a hope that actually the new generation of journalists is interested in their life stories and life experiences, it's just overwhelmingly positive response. And most of the stuff happens during coffee breaks and lunch and dinners, not necessarily during the program. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll ask the same question. Well, do you view success as just more readers or more members, or is it trying to encourage the community in some way that you already have to be more dedicated, trustful, and so on?
Yeah, I was just thinking that the answer to the question would be, well, there are traditional way how to measure success for the media, that's number of readers or business model working somehow, and in that sense, yeah, I don't want to jinx it, so to speak, but we're doing quite well. There are a number of our readers grow up constantly in time, and also a number of subscriptions, which we value a lot because the percentage of long-term subscription is now more than just a one-off purchase number. Therefore, it provides economical stability, and so that's not to say that we don't value people who just buy one issue and read it, but this is important for us. And after years and years of struggling economically, we just, for the few last years, we are actually profitable and doing well economically, which in times where everyone else struggles and the whole business is we all know what it is. So we're quite pleased about that, but we are very much aware that it's not over, it's never over. The struggle goes on, and we have to keep on thinking about new ways how to introduce the content and how to attract readers and all that. And then there are maybe some other ways how to measure success, but again, traditional ones, how much you're quoted by other media, if you bring original content no one else has, if our authors get published, write books, get invited to all sorts of events, host conferences, or all that. But in other words, that we are seen as someone whose voice people want to hear our opinions, and I value that as an author, that I'm asked what I think about certain things, because it means that people think I actually have the proper information. So yeah, so there's various ways how to measure it, but I think if you just follow the traditional ones, I feel like we achieve quite a lot. And it just feels weird to say that, but yeah.
It's okay, you can be proud. Anita.
So obviously we would like to reach more readers and have more and more impact, but if we want to measure like the trust of our audience, I think the best measure of that is how many people contribute to us. And That's a very stable number and slowly rising. We have people who contribute every month. They give us regular payments of small 3, 4, 5 or more euros a month. And also it's a measure of another measure of trust is how many people give us 1% of their taxes. There is this scheme in Hungary where you can give 1% of your income tax to an NGO. And every year there is, everybody's campaigning for this 1%. And Atlatszo has been in like the top 50 most popular NGOs and one of the top out of media NGOs. And I think the fact that we are so popular and in the middle of all this propaganda campaign against us sometimes, it is a huge success that people trust us so much that they still give us their money. Last year, more than 60% of our budget came in from readers themselves. And I think that also shows our legitimacy. And
okay, thank you. I think we have a question back here.
So when you say that, for example, people want journalism to be on their side and to be aware of how information is processed, it sounds to me more about the role of journalists and how people understand this. What kind of advice would you give for a country, for example, like Brazil, which has a lot of undermining of the role of journalists due to political interest and proper media ownership by oligarchs as well? This is very similar, like in some ways, to these countries. And how could we like try to make this better as trying to give this notion to people in this case?
Yeah, well, it's really hard to say because also I'm not really certain that our approach in the Czech Republic has the impact we hope it has, right? So I'm far from giving advices so far. We're actually expanding now the project testing into Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, so that's the furthest where we can actually now see. But, you know, even in the Czech Republic, the media, the public service media that are one of the highest quality media outlets they're increasing campaigns by the politicians, by the populist parties, undermining the credibility of the source, right? So I think it's pretty similar situation, and I think in terms of, I mean, on social media, it looks like that it's working, but again, when you're talking to people, so they still value the public service media as a high quality medium, but it cannot last forever. And so again, it's about like just they need to reach out, and people from the public television and radio, they just need to spend more time, not just doing journalism, but talking about how they do journalism. Ideally more on personal level. And again, I do understand that for the newsrooms, I mean, they're struggling to do the journalism, and then asking them to actually, you know, let the journalists go, spend one day, half day traveling to the other side of the Czech Republic. Well, at least Czech Republic is still small, but still it takes one day. So the journalists, they need to take vacation to do that, right? So it's complicated. So that's what we are hoping for to do in the past, like really collect some research data that actually show that this works and that actually it can bring some new subscribers, so that the newsrooms are more, or the owners of the media are more open to the idea of actually systematically letting the journalists spending time more with people on the ground in facilities like libraries and others. So that's what we're hoping for, that's what we're aiming for at this stage, right? Not just like asking, oh, please, could you come, you know? No, I believe like really 90% journalism, 10% talking about journalism.
Either of you want to add anything too?
Well, I saw you at the Alan Rusbridger debate, so I just want to remind you what he said there. What I felt was really interesting, how he said we should maybe switch the perception of the journalism as being some private commodity you purchase for you and then just you read it, to that it's being a public service in the broadest sense. And if you talk about how we could, what advice to give to maybe some Brazilians who are now worried what's going to happen in their country and maybe with the free press, then, and it's not only happening in countries like this, but you see it in the West, you see it in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, elsewhere, we talked about it, both of us here, that the readers can actually support their source of information if they feel this is really important, not only for them personally, but for the society as a whole. They can actively support the sources of the information. And just one more thing I wanted to say, it could be also done through other institutions of the country. Last year I interviewed a Finnish journalist. Many of you might know her, or maybe some of you know her. She's called Jessica Aro, and she uncovered the troll factory in St. Petersburg. And she was a target of horrific online harassment. And Finnish court decided that 3 of the most prominent trolls that attacked her were guilty of various crimes. One of them was actually sent to prison. He's not in the prison because they appealed. But why I'm saying all this is the court said that not only they attacked her personally and harmed her health and her interest, but they attacked the society as a whole because they harassed a journalist and they made her job difficult, therefore harming the society as a whole. And I think this is really important message to, to everyone, that they say that if you harass a journalist and if you make his or her job difficult to report the news, it's a threat to the society as a whole. So the other institution of the still democratic state can step in and maybe make sure that the free press can exist in a good environment. Yeah.
You mentioned the example of Finland as well, and also Finland and Denmark are perhaps the only countries, I think, in the world, and precisely for sure in European Union, that are with an increasing trust in journalism.
Oh, right.
While, and this is data from the Eurobarometer as well, while in the rest they stay with like above 60%, while the whole average of Europe is around 40 or 34% depending on the country. And
why is that? Do you know the... Sorry,
yeah.
Switching the
no,
dynamic. Like, you tell me now. Why?
Yeah,
what do you think is the reason?
One of the reasons would be that they have not only the principle of arm's length very clear on the society, but as well as a general higher trust in society and also a trust in institutions as well. So countries with weakened institutions cannot give the same trust as they do for journalism, because they also do not believe journalism to be as a clear institution as well. And that would be my second question for you all, actually. So what do you think is, how does it go for this relation? Because this is what I'm trying to prove, and if you have any views on that, how the trust in institutions and journalism as a social institution and as a social good can be benefited, or how can we build this trust higherly?
I don't know, are you asking us as a journalist how we can help the trust towards other institutions? Do I understand you correctly? Yeah. Or
how journalism as a social institution try to give this perception of journalism as a social institution or as a social good could benefit on that? And if you have any enlightenment on that, because this is only a theory that I'm trying to seek, and this is my perception of what it seems to be about the trust in journalism as well. But.
I could just mention really briefly, because we had a panel on this morning on solutions journalism with Samantha's the representative here from that organization. But I think for us, we're trying to push this idea in Central Europe, and it seems to have caught on in many places. And I don't want to go into everything that solutions journalism is or isn't, but one goal is to obviously look at what's working in different places and try to highlight that with the hopes that there'll be enough civic engagement or interest among civic officials to adopt solutions that might work somewhere else. So I think in that way, without assuming an advocacy role, if journalists do a better job of pointing out what's working and public officials are better at adopting those solutions, that is one way to show people not only that the media is responsive to the public interests, but also institutions are as well. So I think you can simultaneously build more trust in the media that here are journalists actually looking out for your good to help you solve issues like healthcare, education, and so on. But also, we all tend to assume, I think, often that all public officials are kind of corrupt and disinterested and don't really want to help out the public, but a lot of times they just don't know where the good solutions are. So just from my end, that's one quick comment. Another one, just based on what Silvie had said before, in terms of trying to, I don't want to say educate because that's too strong a word, but describe to people why the media should be a public good. I think it's really crucial. A lot of us, definitely at this conference, believe that, but we probably assume too much that the public automatically understands that. And I think just an example from the Czech Republic, there is a new publication, maybe a competitor to Respekt, Silvie's publication, maybe not, which is called Deník N, which also started off in Slovakia, has been very successful. In the Czech Republic, in a few months, they already have 10,000 members. And if you had asked people beforehand if that would work, many people would have said no, because according to different research done, when Czechs were asked, would you pay for online media or whatever, those rates were already really low among all Europeans. And it really showed that Czechs were not being asked the right way. It wasn't that they weren't willing to pay for material online, but it was the way they were being asked. So I think that also might be helpful, maybe situation in Brazil or wherever. Don't assume that the public automatically is not going to be interested in quality journalism, won't understand the value of it, but you have to really work on the messaging.
Yeah, just maybe add very quickly to what Jeremy said, that one of what's interesting is when you uncover as a journalist a big scandal or corruption or whatever, a lot of the frustration of the people aims at you as a journalist, which is puzzling because I always think, well, it's not our fault, but a lot of time readers just go, well, okay, so you uncovered it and now what? They just sort of expect from you to, or not, maybe they don't expect from you to actually make the change, but somehow maybe even go further and question the officials or, I don't know. So I think the solution journalism in this sense may be respond to this frustration that there is the ends don't meet and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So yeah, that could be one way how to again regain the trust and maybe answer to this frustration that people feel when they read these stories and they feel like it's not solved, it's not being dealt with, it's hopeless, it's just what's the point, you know, even follow the news. So
sometimes journalism doesn't give the proper solution to it. So like there's like a Danish media institution, the Constructive Journalism Institute, yeah. And also says that like maybe people are losing its hope in news or in whatever because they're not given any hope after that and after this. But just as a
absolutely, comment. They feel that, and it's unfair because you're not there to go out and catch those bad guys and put them in prison. That's not your job there. But we should accept and acknowledge that they feel this frustration and somehow respond to it and maybe try to show them or show everyone that they could be solved this problem in a certain way. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yes, please. Right here.
Question for Jaroslav. What was the most weird question you were asked by, a 60-year-old man from the most remote countryside in Czech Republic? Maybe if you don't recall one.
Sorry to interrupt, but I have one.
You were
Not
there.
From a 60-year-old person.
You were there as well? No.
I was at one event, yeah. But I have one from a student where I described the job, and one student raised their hand and they said, "Oh, so you actually have to call someone?" I was like, "Yeah," it's like I don't have like a wire to a information pool which is like floating above me and I download the information. I actually have to call someone, and it was an interesting moment for me because I didn't realize that someone could actually think that someone could think that you can make newspaper without calling people and without talking to people. So that was bit weird. Sorry.
I don't know. I really can't think of. I would love to have some funny response, but there was nothing like special that would shock me, like how this person can answer this question. It's really more along the lines of like what Silvie was saying. Like it's usually like, oh, we didn't know that journalism is such a craft. It's like a joinery, or it's like a carpentry, or I don't know what's the word, right? Like, and then you talk about like, yeah, this is how you're putting pieces together, right? So you are finding analogies that the older generations do understand very well, right? Like really skilled appreciation of skilled people who are honest about their profession. Yeah, but that's not the most weird questions I heard. I'll try to think about it.
Samantha, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm sorry to ask another question, but a follow-up to the question of how you're measuring this, and that you're measuring trust by subscriptions and by revenue. There was a panel this morning, and a woman from the Reuters Institute was talking about the study that they did. It found, I think it was globally, 44% of people trust media, and 51% of people trust media that they read, that they consume. And so when you're using subscriptions as a proxy for trust, that could, there's a lot of conflated variables there. So have you ever considered like surveying your audience or some other way that directly gets at that question as opposed to relying on the proxy?
So our subscribers are not practically subscribers because we don't have a paywall. So everybody can read our stories for free. We call subscribers who support us. But you refer back to the Alan Rusbridger talk. I was there too, and he also mentioned that you shouldn't put up a paywall and force people to pay, but should explain to them that this is a public good, and if they want to help this public good and reporting, and they think this is important, they should invest in it for others as well. So that's what we are doing, and we have always been doing. So I think those who do send us their money and practically get nothing extra back, except for the little letter we send them to thank them, I think we can pretty much say that they do trust us, because otherwise they wouldn't pay, because they would be free to read it anyway.
But it's a bit sort of a conflicting situation here, because we actually discussed this yesterday, that I almost don't want them to trust us like 100% and trust every word we say, because we want them to be critically thinking, and we want them maybe to include the benefit of the doubt, or that we can be wrong. And at the same time, I feel there's a growing sense of responsibility. Of course, it was always there, but I feel like it's even more than it was before, that you feel really responsible for putting correct information out there for the people to read. But just to answer your question, I don't think we have any survey, and it's a good point. We should probably do some survey about how people perceive what we actually give them in the sense of, do they actually trust it, or do they take you with a little bit of salt?
Okay, well, I'm afraid we have to wrap up. I just wanted to do a little bit of organizational promotion. We have some inspiring examples here from Central and Eastern Europe. My organization, every year we do a conference in Prague. This year it's going to be in early December, and we're going to look specifically at examples of media that they're doing something right, something that's working, mostly focused on Central and Eastern Europe, but not only. So it's in early December. If any of you are interested, Prague is beautiful in the wintertime, Christmas markets and all of that. Come visit us. Otherwise, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you for braving the rain and coming out, and have a good evening. Thank you.